Something that I wanted to talk about was the whole trend of like, I used to be a fascist 2 or 3 years ago or whatever creators on YouTube and Twitch, etc. Maybe they also exist in other platforms and spaces too. I'm not really sure, but like this whole phenomenon of people who like, it really seems like, they go from being like a fascist or a borderline fascist or sometimes even like an actual Nazi very recently. And then like a year or two later, it's like, here's my YouTube channel. Check it out, guys. Give me money. Here's my Patreon. And a lot of these people are sadly very successful. Now, on the most obvious level, it's like, if 2 years ago you were a fucking fascist or whatever, and now you're a leftist, do you really think that you have anything special to offer? That you have any special insight to offer, any knowledge to offer, that you've studied on a level that makes you like in a place to implant yourself as some sort of thought leader, explainer, teacher, or whatever? Like Sanderhall, who we just went over, is a great example of that. Like you were like a fascist, you were in the alt-right pipeline or whatever, and literally the second that you got out of this, apparently you started a YouTube channel where you're like a lefty debater who's owning people in debates or whatever. Doesn't that seem weird to you guys? It seems very weird to me. It's just doesn't sit right. There's plenty of people out there who have spent a whole lot longer than like a year or two involved in leftist politics, who were certainly never fascists at any point in their life. In fact, the average person has never been close to being a fascist, okay? The fact of the matter is, if you live in like today's Western societies, the default position is liberalism, okay? Like a social liberal. At least for young people, younger than 40 years old, your default position is that like you think homophobia is bad, you think racism is bad, you think sexism is bad, etc. Transphobia is more up in the air, but that will hopefully change soon enough. But like, now obviously this is a surface level thing, right? Like these people are still very often racist, they're very often homophobic, but not in ways that are very overt. Like a fascist is ideologically homophobic, or maybe not, maybe at least ideologically racist, stuff like that, ideologically misogynist, etc. A liberal generally is not. A liberal is like not really, yeah, a lot of them or even most of them are racist, but they're not that aware of it. They think racism is bad, but they would argue with you that they're not racist, okay? An actual Nazi would be like they might not outright say that they're a racist, but they wouldn't so much argue with you about it, right? They would say like, oh, my beliefs are rooted in reality or whatever. It's just nature, bro. So there's a difference there, right? A lot of the time, people who are like fascists in these Western societies or Nazis or whatever try to frame themselves, or other people frame them as like victims of like helpless victims of indoctrination. But that's just not the case at all. The vast majority of the time, you have to actively try to become a racist, to become homophobic, to become a sexist in modern Western societies. You have to actively become one yourself. You're not like the victim of like the dominant ideology or something here, because it's not the dominant ideology, at least on the surface, at least like in such an overt sort of way. So be like fascists, these poor fascists were brought in by evil indoctrinators. They're not responsible for what they did or anything. That's just not true at all. They're responsible for it. They held those beliefs because they wanted to hold them. Far more often than not, they were led to them because they are privileged people who see fascism as a way of obtaining more privileges, or upholding the privileges that they already hold, or restoring the privileges that they believe they have lost. So these people are not victims at all, not in any way, shape, or form. Yet still, we get people with these sort of stories, backstories, like, honestly, they're sort of framed as like a sob story very often, which is very weird to me, because it's not a sob story. That you thought black people were not humans 2 years ago is not a sob story. It's not an uplifting origin story. It's just, you were a piece of shit. And that you aren't as much of a piece of shit anymore isn't something that you should hold over people's heads. Isn't something that you should like uphold as something special about you. But for some reason it is. And for some reason people buy it hook, line, and sinker. I wasn't a Nazi at any point in my life. I wasn't anywhere close to being a fascist at any point in my life. I never thought that black people weren't human. There's a difference between casual racism and ideological racism, okay? And if you're like an alt-righter, lots of conservatives, a fascist or whatever, you are an ideological racist most of the time, the vast majority of the time. So that's the difference. But yeah, the point is, mostly, if you became a leftist relatively recently, like a few years ago at most, what exactly is it that you are offering that makes you someone, like in some sort of special circumstance, to become a thought leader, to open up a channel and like educate other people or give your takes on stuff? What exactly is it? There's nothing there. There are countless other people who were not fascist a couple of years ago or anything. Like, have a little bit of humility, learn about stuff, engage honestly. It's just, for me, it's very plainly obvious that most of these people are in it for personal gain, like the very definition of grifting, because it's like they become leftists, or at least they say they become leftists. Most of them are not leftists at all in my book. But anyway, they try to turn themselves into internet personalities, into internet thought leaders very quickly afterwards. And it's like, really? It really makes it seem like they became leftists for clout, because they saw it as like a way to, as like a gateway. You know, they would have like a nice origin story they could point to that would get them views. And for some reason, a lot of people do fall for that. I understand why that's such an appealing thing. Honestly, I think in real life, most people were never even like that. The average person, when faced with difficulties in their life, is not led towards racism or homophobia or misogyny, okay? Like, I would say in Western countries, like, 50, 60, 70% of people aren't even remotely going to flirt with those things when they face some difficulties in their life or imagine difficulties or whatever. But for some reason, in internet spaces, there's like this overwhelming current of people who like identify with these streamers or whatever who used to be borderline Nazis, and it's like, oh yeah, I also used to be a borderline Nazi. I'm so glad I was de-radicalized. I was such a poor victim. I was indoctrinated into this fascist thought or whatever. No, you weren't. You were a victimizer. You were a piece of shit, and you have a toning to do for that. Not just a toning, but you should be honestly trying to engage and learn, rather than like immediately opening up a fucking YouTube channel and being like, here's my Patreon. I know basically nothing about the shit that I'm talking about. At best, what I can give you is like a liberal left sort of Wikipedia reading on a topic. But yeah, I'm a thought leader now. Give me money. And that's the origin story of like half of fucking ThreadTube, honestly. It's really weird and absurd, and it speaks to like who the audience are. And yeah, I mean, it's understandable that you've only been engaging with real political ideas for a couple of years, so you don't really know much about them. You don't really have much to offer other people. But we're talking about normal people there, okay? It's different when that's you and you immediately make a YouTube channel or a Twitch or whatever and like immediately start trying to grift off your former fascist status. And yeah, there's certainly an element of opportunism to it. Personally, ideologically, I've been where I am now for like at least 10 years. Like, sure, I've learned a lot more and refined things, but like, I didn't think that women weren't people 10 years ago. I didn't think that black people weren't people 10 years ago. These people are like, 2 years ago, like, I thought that all Muslims should be deported from the West, but now I have a YouTube channel where I'm telling you about what the left should be. No, fuck off. Have some fucking humility. Or even like from a material standpoint, sit down and learn. What's going on here? Just sit down and fucking learn. You're not special. If anything, your past makes you worse than the average blank slate liberal who became a leftist, or like someone who's been a leftist for a very long time. It doesn't make you a special person who merits being propped up. Yet for some reason the audience and the algorithm often sees it in that way. I don't know. Just something that really bothers me.